They say men choose to be single. But what if that's not true? What if the modern man is not single by choice, but by design? What if the very system that tells him to be kind, be patient, and wait for love is the same system that conditions him to be invisible? I've spent years studying persuasion, manipulation, and the human condition, and I've come to realize something unsettling. Most men are not victims of bad luck. They are victims of psychological conditioning orchestrated by forces they don't even recognize. My name is Melkor Huamán, and I study the hidden mechanisms that move people, the silent wars between desire and control. In this episode of Invisible Power, I'll show you why so many men remain single for years, and how, whether you accept it or not, women are part of the design. You see, throughout history, every empire has relied on a subtle form of social manipulation. Niccolo Machiavelli called it the art of appearing virtuous while ruling through fear. Edward Bernays, the father of propaganda, transformed it into modern marketing, teaching elites how to mold public opinion like clay. And Robert Cialdini revealed how compliance, reciprocity, and scarcity could turn anyone into a predictable puppet. These same principles now govern modern relationships. Social media has become the new battlefield. Validation is the new currency, and attention, the rarest and most addictive drug of our century. Women learned faster how to weaponize it. They understood that in a world of infinite male supply, value is no longer measured by love, but by perceived status. The quiet man with a pure heart is now invisible, while the man who can trigger desire, even if he's broken, becomes magnetic. When I studied Paul Ekman's research on micro-expressions, I noticed something curious. Women subconsciously detect emotional insecurity within seconds. They don't need to hear your story. They read it in the way your eyes hesitate before speaking, the slight downward curve of your shoulders, the silence between your words. Attraction is not emotional. It's biological, and biology doesn't reward the kind. It rewards the strong. But strength in this new era isn't about muscles or money. It's about psychological control, the ability to regulate emotion while others drown in it. The average man has lost that ability. He's been trained to overshare, to seek approval, to fear rejection. He has been domesticated. Meanwhile, feminine psychology has evolved into something far more strategic. Many women no longer pursue love. They pursue leverage. They've learned that power in relationships is not given. It's extracted through a mixture of emotional intelligence, social influence, and selective attention. They maintain control while convincing men that it's all about connection. And here lies the paradox. Men are told to open up, but when they do, they lose respect. They're told to communicate more, but when they do, they sound needy. They're told to be vulnerable, but vulnerability without status is weakness. It's not that women are cruel. Most aren't even aware of the mechanics behind their behavior. It's that human attraction operates under the same principles of power, perception, and psychology that Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, and Bernays wrote about centuries ago. The battlefield has simply changed, and yet most men walk through it blind. The tragedy is not that men can't find love. The tragedy is that they can't see the invisible system that defines their worth. From the moment a boy is born, he is programmed to earn validation, to perform, to prove, to please. It begins with parents who reward compliance and continues through schools that punish individuality. By the time he becomes an adult, he has been conditioned to believe that his value depends on how much he can offer others, especially women. Meanwhile, women are taught something entirely different. They learn that their value is innate, biological, unquestioned. A woman does not need to prove her worth to attract attention. She simply exists, and the world bends around her. As Dale Carnegie would say, the person who can make others feel important will control them. But what happens when a generation of men is taught to make everyone else feel important, except themselves? You create a society of men addicted to external validation, and women, consciously or not, exploit that addiction. I've spoken with countless men who confess the same pattern. They meet a woman who shows them attention, and instantly their brain releases a cocktail of dopamine and hope. They mistake interest for intimacy. attention for affection and connection for commitment. In psychology, this is known as intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. A woman doesn't need to promise anything. She only needs to offer a fraction of attention, then withdraw it. The man's brain does the rest. He chases, invests, apologizes, proves, all for a prize that never existed. Robert B. Cialdini called this the principle of commitment and consistency. Once a man begins investing emotionally or financially, his ego traps him. He can't stop because stopping would mean admitting he was manipulated, and pride is a powerful leash. Kevin Dutton, in The Wisdom of Psychopaths, describes how charm and emotional detachment create influence. Women who master the art of selective empathy are appearing, soft while being strategically cold, control men. Without force, they don't demand. They inspire surrender. But here's the cruelest part. Modern culture applauds this behavior. Social media turned it into an economy. Instagram rewards vanity. TikTok amplifies sexual signaling. And dating apps quantify human desire into data points. Every like is a microdose of dopamine. Every seen message a test of power. And men? They became the fuel, the silent audience, the consumers of illusion. They scroll through curated images of unattainable perfection, comparing themselves to digital phantoms, wondering why they're never enough. But the truth is simple. They were never meant to be enough, because a man who feels complete is dangerous to a system that profits from his emptiness. Philip Zimbardo once said, "The modern man is not evil. He is absent. Absent of purpose, of identity, of rebellion. He has been taught to smile through rejection, to interpret disrespect as misunderstanding, and to call weakness emotional intelligence." I am not telling you to hate women. I am telling you to understand them, because understanding disarms manipulation. You can't fight what you don't. See, the feminine psyche operates through perception, is what is seen, admired, envied, or desired. And in a digital era, perception is power. That's why you must learn the principles of dark psychology, not to control others, but to reclaim yourself. Only by studying the mechanics of manipulation can you stop being its product. The first rule is simple. Detach from validation. When you no longer react to attention, you become unpredictable. When you no longer chase approval, you become magnetic. And when you master silence, you become dangerous, not because you threaten others, but because you no longer need them to feel whole. At some point, every man reaches a breaking point. It doesn't happen in a loud, cinematic moment. It happens in silence. One night he lies awake staring at the ceiling, realizing that he's been playing a game whose rules were written by someone else. He thought love was about honesty. He thought effort would be rewarded. But all his sincerity ever brought him was indifference. That's the night when clarity begins. Because when pain repeats itself often enough, it turns into wisdom. And wisdom, in its rawest form, is the death of illusion. I remember the first time I recognized the manipulation behind affection. A woman who knew exactly when to text, not too soon to seem desperate, not too late to seem disinterested. Each message crafted like a chemical dose, enough to spark curiosity, never enough to give certainty. It wasn't love, it was control disguised as connection. That's when I understood what Daniel Kahneman meant by the mind is a machine for jumping to conclusions. We don't see people as they are. We see the stories we build around them. And for men, those stories are often built on longing, the desperate need to feel chosen. But longing makes you blind, and blindness is the first stage of control. Once you see it, you begin to understand what Robert Greene calls the law of power in reverse. Those who seek validation surrender power. Those who remain mysterious attract it. In every human interaction, someone is leading, and someone is following. In modern relationships, men follow because they seek peace. Women lead because they understand tension creates desire. But tension, if mastered, can work both ways. A man who learns to hold silence without seeking reassurance becomes magnetic, because silence in a world addicted to noise is a declaration of power. Feminine psychology reacts to contrast. The more unpredictable your energy, the more intriguing you become. It's not cruelty, it's biology. In evolutionary terms, unpredictability signaled strength, intelligence, and genetic superiority. A predictable man was safe, but forgettable. An enigmatic man was dangerous, but unforgettable. This is why I tell men to stop explaining themselves. Every explanation is an apology for existing, and every apology teaches others how to treat you. Instead, speak less, observe more. As Paul Ekman proved, micro-expressions reveal more truth than words ever could. When you stay still, others expose themselves. Their tone, their gaze, their hesitation, all betray intention, but you can't see any of it while you're trying to prove your worth. Men don't lose because women are cruel. They lose because they refuse to understand how attraction actually works. Attraction is not a reward for kindness. It's a biological response to perceived power, control, and self-sufficiency. You don't need to become manipulative to win. You need to become aware. Because awareness is immunity. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you stop playing, the game collapses. There comes a moment when a man stops asking, "What's wrong with women?" and begins to ask, "What happened to me?" That's when the shift begins and the silent rebirth, because power does not return through rage or revenge. It returns through awareness, through the simple, painful realization that nobody is coming to save you and nobody ever was. You see, dependency is the death of masculine energy, and modern society has turned dependence into a virtue. It teaches men to outsource validation, to beg for approval, to believe that comfort is the ultimate goal, but comfort is the slowest form of decay. It kills the warrior before the battle even. Begins Aldous Huxley once warned that a comfortable prison is still a prison, and that is exactly what modern relationships have become. A psychological prison built on comfort, convenience, and conformity. Men remain single not because they can't find love, but because they have lost the ability to be dangerous, not violent, but capable of walking away, capable of being alone, capable of existing without permission. When you rediscover that capability, something changes. Your energy shifts from needing to choosing, from chasing to attracting, from being a servant of emotion to being its master. That's what Sun Tzu meant in The Art of War when he said, "The greatest victory is to conquer without fighting." Because once you understand how people think, you no longer have to fight for attention. You command it. The first rule of dark psychology is not to manipulate others. It's to stop being manipulated. The moment you stop reacting, you start ruling. Most people never learn that because their ego is louder than their intuition. They want to be understood more than they want to be free. But freedom demands solitude, and solitude is where power is born. When you stop filling silence with noise, you begin to hear the truth. You were never unworthy. You were simply distracted. Distracted by illusions of love, social expectations, and digital mirages. The world needs men who can think clearly, feel deeply, and act strategically. Men who can love without losing themselves. Men who can understand the feminine without worshipping it. Men who can master emotion without denying it. That is the new archetype, not the cold manipulator, but the conscious strategist. The man who uses the principles of Cialdini and Green not to deceive, but to direct. The man who studies Machiavelli not to dominate, but to defend. The man who embodies the calm of Sun Tzu and the awareness of Kahneman, dangerous because he knows the rules, yet chooses when to play. And here's the paradox. When you reach that state, women feel it. They can sense when a man no longer needs them. And that's when attraction ignites. Again. Because independence is the highest form of seduction. You become what I call psychologically sovereign. A man who belongs to no narrative but his own. A man who can love without losing clarity. A man who can desire without becoming desperate. This is where the story begins, not where it ends. Because once you understand why you've been single, you realize it was never a curse, it was preparation. Process of purification that stripped away illusion until only truth remained. The world doesn't need more men chasing love. It needs men who embody it, not the romantic kind, the kind that manifests as purpose, discipline, and control. When you walk this path, you stop waiting for someone to complete you. You realize that the masculine and the feminine were never enemies, they were reflections. Two forces dancing in a timeless rhythm, each testing the other to reveal truth. The question is not why women are to blame. The real question is, will you remain asleep, or will you reclaim the mind that the world tried to sedate? Because the moment you choose awareness, you stop being a victim of psychology and become its master. Every manipulation begins with attention. It's the currency of the soul, and whoever controls it, controls emotion. Most men think manipulation is loud, dramatic or obvious. In truth, it's soft, elegant, almost invisible. It starts with curiosity, evolves into connection, and ends in control. Women, whether consciously or not, understand this better than most men. Their psychology operates through subtlety, tone, timing, and tension. They rarely need to demand obedience. They invite it. As Edward Bernays wrote, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. The same principle applies to relationships. The first tactic is selective availability. She appears when you least expect it and vanishes when you need her most. This irregular pattern triggers intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive psychological loop ever studied. It's the same system casinos use to keep players hooked. Uncertainty, disguised as hope. Your brain learns to crave the next win, not realizing that the game was never meant to end. The second tactic is emotional mirroring. At first, she reflects your values, dreams, and fears. She becomes your ideal mirror. You believe you've finally found someone who understands you, but what she's really doing is collecting data, learning how to comfort you, how to disarm you, how to own your narrative. Then comes withdrawal of affection. She stops replying, her voice cools, her eyes wander. Your mind enters panic mode, and suddenly, all your logic dissolves. You begin negotiating with yourself, excusing her distance, inventing reasons for her silence. You start to chase the version of her that no longer exists. This is where Cialdini's principle of scarcity takes control. What was once abundant becomes rare, and rarity amplifies desire. Your brain doesn't want her. It wants relief from uncertainty. She knows this, even if she can't articulate it. And that's the brilliance of feminine manipulation. It's often instinctual, not intellectual. Paul Ekman would call it emotional calibration. She adjusts micro-behaviors based on your reactions. A glance, a sigh, a subtle delay before answering. Each micro-movement trains your nervous system like Pavlov trained his dogs. By the time you notice, the pattern is complete. And yet, these tactics are not evil. They are evolutionary. For centuries, women had to survive by reading emotions, by influencing protectors stronger than themselves. What once was a survival tool became, in modern times, a social weapon. But here's what most men miss. Manipulation only works when there's an emotional gap to exploit. When a man seeks validation more than truth, he becomes vulnerable. The manipulator does not create weakness, she reveals it. That's why awareness is the antidote, not revenge, not bitterness. Awareness. Once you've seen the pattern, your next step is not to run, it's to observe. The untrained man reacts. The awakened man studies. Because the most dangerous person in any psychological game is not the one who attacks, but the one who stays calm. The first rule of defense is emotional detachment. Detachment is not coldness, it's clarity. It's the space between stimulus and response where control is born. As Viktor Frankl once said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In that space, manipulation dies. You must learn to feel without obeying your feelings. When she withdraws, don't chase. When she tests you, don't defend. When she provokes, don't justify. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop feeding the dynamic. Understand this. A manipulator thrives on prediction. If she can predict your reaction, she owns you. If she can't, she loses control. Unpredictability is your greatest armor. Sun Tzu wrote, "Be formless, shapeless like water. To defend yourself psychologically, you must flow. Never fight emotion with emotion, fight emotion with awareness. When she uses silence as punishment, embrace it as peace. When she withholds affection, give it to yourself through discipline and progress. She cannot control a man who is already self-sufficient. The second rule is psychological inversion. This means using her tactics, not to harm, but to balance the field, mirror her energy, not her emotion. If she becomes distant, you become scarce. If she seeks attention, delay your response. When you stop rewarding manipulation, it starves. But remember, these are not games of ego. They're exercises in self-respect. You're not proving you're better. You're proving you can't be broken. Robert Greene called it the art of indifference. It's not that you don't care. It's that you care correctly. You stop investing in uncertainty and start investing in yourself. Your silence becomes seductive. Your calm becomes intimidating. Your boundaries become sacred. The third rule is pattern recognition. Every manipulator has a rhythm and affection, withdrawal, guilt, reward. Once you can predict it, it loses magic. You begin to see the same movie playing over and over, and suddenly you're no longer the actor. You're the director. From that position, power returns naturally. Philip Zimbardo once said, "Situations do not make men evil. They reveal the evil that was always possible." Likewise, toxic relationships don't create weakness. They expose the parts of you that refuse to grow. Your goal is not to avoid pain, it's to use it. Pain is the alarm system of the unconscious. When something hurts repeatedly, it's not punishment, it's education. And once you integrate that lesson, you become immune. The manipulative woman, the narcissistic friend, the controlling environment, they can no longer reach you because your identity no longer depends on their approval. That's the final stage of psychological mastery, inner sovereignty. It's not loud, it's not violent, it's quiet. It's the peace of knowing that nobody outside you controls the way you feel, think, or act. Men who reach that level no longer chase women. They attract alignment. They don't seek partners to fill their emptiness. They seek allies to expand their purpose. And women, sensing that stability, either evolve with them or disappear. That is not arrogance. That is natural selection of the mind. So if you're tired of being played, stop playing. Step outside the emotional theater and become the audience. Because once you watch the game long enough, you realize something extraordinary. The one who understands psychology doesn't need to manipulate. He simply observes, and the world rearranges itself around his silence. Theories mean nothing if you can't live them. Understanding manipulation is only half the battle. The real challenge is mastering yourself, because the battlefield of dark psychology is not out there. It's inside your mind. Every morning, before you touch your phone, before you read a message, before you let the world seduce your attention, stop. Sit in silence. Observe your thoughts like a scientist. Don't judge them. Don't fight them, just watch. Because awareness grows in stillness. You see, most men wake up already hypnotized. Their first instinct is to seek stimulation. A message, a notification, to a face. Each of those things activates the same neural pathways that addiction does. Before they even leave their bed, they've already surrendered control of their dopamine. That's why the first exercise is dopamine discipline. You must train your brain to stop craving constant reward. Delete the apps that drain you. Schedule your use of social media instead of living inside it. When you control your attention, you control your value. Because attention is the modern currency, and men who waste it end up poor in every sense. The second exercise is controlled exposure. If emotional chaos weakens you, expose yourself to it intentionally in small doses. Spend time with people who challenge you but do not drain you. Learn to be calm in tension. Sun Tzu said, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Your emotions are both enemy and ally. Learn their rhythm, and they'll serve you." Then comes verbal precision. Stop saying everything you feel. The man who narrates every emotion becomes predictable. When you master silence, you weaponize curiosity. Women, especially those attuned to social cues, feel this instinctively. When you stop oversharing, your words gain weight. Every sentence becomes intentional. Every pause becomes magnetic. The next step is ritualize self-respect. Respect isn't an emotion. It's a system. Wake up and complete the promises you make to yourself. Train your body. Sharpen your mind. Protect your boundaries. Because the world measures you not by your intentions, but by your consistency. A man without rituals becomes a man without gravity. And without gravity, nothing orbits around you. Not women, not respect, not success. When you practice these habits long enough, something shifts. Your energy becomes heavier, not dark, but grounded. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer explain, you demonstrate. And that's when people begin to say there's something different about you, but it's not magic. It's structure. I often tell my students, if you can't control your morning, you'll never control your relationships, because discipline is transferable. How you do anything is how you do everything. The man who betrays his goals will always betray his boundaries. And now, the hardest part, ethical application. Dark psychology is not a weapon for revenge. It's a mirror for awareness. When you understand persuasion, manipulation, and influence, you realize they are neutral tools. A knife can heal or harm. The difference is intent. Use these principles to protect, not to dominate, to lead, not to control, to understand others deeply, not to exploit them. Because once you see how easy it is to manipulate, you realize the only noble use of power is mastery over yourself. Midway through this transformation, something happens. You'll feel resistance. You'll be tempted to relapse, to return to comfort, to message that person again, to scroll for validation. That's your old self dying. Let it. Transformation is violent because your ego resists death. But beyond that, pain lies sovereignty, the kind that cannot be taken away by rejection, silence or loss. And if you've made it this far, I'll tell you this: subscribe to this channel. Not because I want followers, but because every week I'll teach you how to unlearn the illusions that make men weak. Together, we'll rebuild your psychology from the ground up, not to turn you cold, but to turn you unbreakable. There is a point in every man's journey when knowledge is no longer enough, when books, theories, and techniques lose meaning, because you can learn everything about dark psychology and still be a slave to your own emotions. Awareness without transformation is vanity. You see, real power begins when you stop performing strength and start embodying silence. When you stop reacting to pain and begin listening to it, because pain has always been your greatest teacher. It just spoke a language you refused to learn. For years, I thought understanding manipulation would protect me. It didn't. It only revealed that the true manipulator was my own attachment, the part of me that couldn't let go of illusion. We all create prisons with invisible bars, nostalgia, fantasy, hope. But the hardest truth of all is this: some people are not lessons. They are distractions. They appear in your life not to love you, but to measure your strength. So I'll ask you something. When will you stop mistaking attraction for alignment? When will you stop chasing those who don't even respect your silence? And when will you finally realize that solitude is not loneliness, it's training? Because the man who cannot stand alone will kneel for anyone who offers comfort. You must understand this. The world doesn't reward good men. It rewards strong men, and strength isn't cruelty, it's clarity under pressure. It's kindness without dependence. It's love that doesn't beg to be returned. Every woman, every interaction, every rejection, they all carry information. Each one teaches you something about your energy, your value, your blind spots. If you keep encountering the same patterns, it's because the lesson is incomplete. Life will repeat the exam until you pass it. You don't overcome darkness by denying it. You overcome it by mastering it, by seeing it clearly and refusing to be consumed by it. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So here's my challenge for you. For the next 7 days, say nothing unnecessary. Observe everything. Do not explain. Do not defend. Do not chase. Just watch how people react to your silence. You'll discover who respects your energy and who was feeding off it. Because the truth is simple. Silence exposes manipulation faster than confrontation ever will. When you stop feeding chaos with attention, it starves. When you stop reacting, you rise above the game, and once you rise above it, You no longer attract chaos, you attract peace. You were never meant to live as a victim of other people's psychology. You were meant to master your own, and that mastery begins the moment you stop seeking and start seeing. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The greatest power you'll ever hold is not control over others. It's control over the mind that once controlled you. Now ask yourself, are you ready to stop chasing love and start commanding respect? Because the world doesn't need another man trying to be liked. It needs one more man who finally understands himself.